This is an overview of the Gwaltney-Thompson Cemetery. Grandma Martha Gwaltney and Albert moved to Wayne County in 1886 from Craven County. This cemetery is located directly back of the orthopedic clinic on Hospital Road Extension in Goldsboro, North Carolina. If you look at the foreground in the picture, it's very close to the area where Grandmama's house was standing at the time they moved to Wayne County. The reason the cemetery is located so far back in the field now is because they changed the road. The old road to Snow Hill ran right along the side of the house that Grandmama lived in. This is a picture of the cedar tree. The green briars had wrapped around it so thick and were growing up to the very top of the tree. The briars were so large that I had to take the hand clippers and cut them off one at a time to try to make me a path out into the other parts of the cemetery. After I got the path cleared around the tree, we got a man to come down and cut that old gum tree that was at the very edge of the cemetery. The tree had been growing almost 100 years. I'm now trying to work my way back into the wooded area where I knew the graves were located. This is where I was cutting a path to the Taylor children's graves. There were 3 of the Taylor children that belonged to Luke Taylor. This is where I was going to the Gardner grave. If you'll look close now, you can see the Gardner headstones in the background. To your right is the Spence baby. This is a clear picture of the Spence child's grave. This is where I was looking for another Taylor grave. And this is where I was looking for Bertha Core. She was the wife of Jesse Core. This is the Merritt grave. The Merritts were neighbors of Grandmama and Grandpa Gwaltney. This shows the gum tree after we got it cut down in the big stump. There was a root coming out from the stump that went almost across the cemetery. We knew we had to get that root out or else we would not be able to get the headstones put in proper order. So it took Melinda and I about 2 weeks to get the root dug up. After we got it cleaned off, we cut all the branches off the main root with a handsaw. But to get the large root out of the ground, we had to have someone to come down with a chainsaw. Before the man could saw it, we had to take water and wash the root off real clean so no sand would get in his chainsaw. This is a picture of the root after we got it out of the ground. He cut it in 3 sections before he could get it up. This shows the cemetery after I got paths made in it. and I decided it was time then to get the bulldozer. Mr. Cox was in charge of furnishing the bulldozer. It took him a week to get the man down there. He's directing the bulldozer. He's trying to get up the big stump that was the stump of the gum tree. This shows where they're fixing to leave the cemetery with the stump. The next view shows the stump going out of the cemetery down to the branch. It went directly to the east and to the branch. This shows a nest that's in the top of that cedar tree. After I got all those big old briars pulled down out of the top, the nest showed up. The man that was logging down there said it was a falcon's nest. I've had other opinions, and there's a debate going on now as to whether it is a big hawk or if it's a falcon. This shows the Taylor grave. There was a tiny little scrap on her metal marker that said Taylor. After we dug down into the grave, we found a pair of glasses. They were small black rimmed glasses that looked like they may have been made for a little old lady. So we started calling her Grandma Taylor. It was amazing that the glasses were just as clear as they were when they were put in the ground. This is when we started looking for the Gardner graves. The bulldozer had kind of upset our landmarks. We had dug a large area trying to locate these bodies. The particular morning after we did find the bodies, I had said an earnest prayer that I might be able to find the bodies that morning. And just about time I gave up, Billy came down and vowed and declared that I'd never find them because I'd already dug 7 feet in the ground. But decided to go down one more shovelful, and when they stuck the shovel in the ground, it hit metal. So you can see from this picture how we had to tunnel back in there to get the remains. What had happened? I think the headstones apparently were put up years after the people were buried, because the headstones were just about in the center of the body. It's my belief that Mr. Gardner was buried alive because of the position that his skeleton was in. He had one arm above his head and another arm down close to his feet, and his knees were drawn up. His head was over to one side. We know that a lot of people were buried alive. Grandmama had a cousin that was buried alive, and the reason they knew that was because they had moved down to the coast but decided they didn't like it down there and they wanted to go back to Craven County. But the boy died. He was a teenager. He died about 2 weeks before the family was ready to move. So they put him in a temporary grave. When they dug him up to move him, his mother wanted to look at him. And when they opened the casket, he had turned over on his stomach, had torn his shroud all to pieces, and had pulled his hair out. Grandmama had a horrible fear of dying because she was afraid that she might be buried alive. And she never could get over that until they started embalming people. We know that a lot of people were buried alive because I was reading a 1886 newspaper, and there was an article in it where they had discovered another way of telling if a person was dead. They said you needed to take a candle and hold it under the person's thumb. If you could see light coming through the thumbnail, then that person was not dead. The story goes that Robert E. Lee's mother was buried alive when she was about 14. Lucky for her, they did not bury her in the ground. She was put in the family mausoleum. And when she came out of the coma, she was screaming for help, and one of the servants happened to pass by and heard her yelling. She grew up, got married, and Robert E. Lee was the result of the marriage. This is when I was looking for the Taylor children. The same thing applied here. I knew I was in the right vicinity, but it was real hard to hit the exact spot. So you can see the large area I had dug up. I was working by myself that morning when the man that farms came down. He wanted to plant his soybeans on Monday. So I told him that I would work until Saturday night, and if I hadn't found everybody, I would just stop and plot the area so I could go back next fall and dig some more. He volunteered to let his migrant worker, Imando, work the rest of the day and the next day to help me out. This was the workingest man I have ever seen in all my life. He could throw out 3 shovelfuls of dirt while I was trying to get one out. We did not take pictures of all the handles that came off the coffins that were in the graves. It was amazing that none of the caskets were intact. They were all in crumbles. You could just get bits and pieces, but all the handles were intact. The handle from this came from the baby of Luke Taylor, little Molly. They were gold-plated and just as bright when I dug them up out of the dirt as when they were put down. The plaque that's down at the bottom says, "Our Darling." This is the grave of Bertha Core, the wife of Jesse Core. This is Imando. We had been working all day and about to die from the heat when we finally got into these graves. For some reason, it seemed like either the headstones had been put up later or they had shifted around some way because they were going at an angle instead of directly east and west. This is another view working on the Merritt grave. Melinda slipped up on us and took this picture. We were not aware that she was anywhere around. These were the handles from the Thompson grave. It said, "At rest." These were silver-plated handles and in very good condition. These were the handles from Mrs. Merritt's grave. These were the only graves that we found where the casket had any little pieces at all in it. All the others, the casket had just turned to dirt and was like crumbs. But these had small pieces of the wood so that you could see the grain in it. So we decided from the looks of the grain it must be mahogany, and that's the reason it had lasted so long. Well, right here is still in the merit grave, but you can look at from the expression on my face now and see that I'm about ready for Freddie. Among the other things that we dug up were these snake eggs. We dug up 3 nests of snake eggs, and as it happened, they were all in the grave. After we got ready for the fence, we had to wait 2 weeks for the fence people to come down. They were behind in the work. They came down on Friday and put up these posts, and they had to cure out until Monday. On Monday morning, they came back and finished putting up the fence. Then we started the project of cleaning the headstones. What we did was take some snapshots before and after. The back row are the Taylor children. You can see that we had cleaned 2 of those headstones and left 1. Coming forward is the Thompson and Gardner stones. We cleaned the one on the end. It was just as black as those 2 that's on the right. This is just another view of the Taylor children. You can see how pretty and white their stone came out. The monument man that went down to set up the stones said that stone in the middle that belonged to Minnie today would sell for $1,500. These 2 stones are Aunt Maggie and Uncle Royal. Royal's on the left and Aunt Maggie on the right, and her stone was almost as dark as Royal's when we started working on it. This is a long shot showing the cemetery after we got the stones all cleaned up. The hole in the foreground is the merit grave. This shows after we got things ready for the dedication. The flower garden that's fixed there, the daylilies, Grandmama planted those around the late 1920s. The bulbs bloomed this year. They're jonquils. Of course, they're not showing now. But the daylilies bloomed real pretty. This shows the headstones for the Confederate soldiers, how they're draped before you start the ceremony. This is a shot that was taken after the ceremony was over. In front of each monument, there's a red rose and a Confederate flag. This shows another shot of the flower garden. The stone in your far left is a core headstone. The bulldozer had broken that stone into bits and pieces, so I built me a form and put it back together with cement. It turned out well enough so that you could read it. The stone on the right, we found some markers that just had initials on it. So I had one marker made that said unknown and put those two small stones in front of that. This shows Franklin Monroe Gwaltney. He was the son of William Gwaltney. Franklin married Carolina The headstone in this picture is Franklin Monroe Gwaltney. He was in the Confederate Army. Grandpa Franklin was sick in the hospital in Goldsboro and Richmond. He was transferred back to North Carolina in the hospital again and finally sent on home where he died. When Grandpa Albert was born, Franklin's commanding officer, Stephen Quinley, wanted to name him. So he named him Albert Johnston Jefferson Davis Stonewall Jackson Stephen Lee Gwaltney. Franklin married Caroline Van Pelt. Caroline was the daughter of Jonathan Van Pelt. Grandpa Jonathan is the one that dropped the Van to his name. Franklin and Caroline had several children, Grandpapa being the baby. He married Martha Elizabeth Taylor, the daughter of George Taylor. Albert and Martha left Craven County in 1886 and moved to Wayne County. This shows a picture of George Taylor's headstone. It's so old and worn that it did not show up very well in the photograph. In 1891, Grandmama and Grandpapa was living in the area right near the cemetery when Daisy died. Gwaltney-Thompson gave them a section in the cemetery. These are their children: Daisy, Mary Melinda, Royal, Maggie, Nina, and Aunt Maggie's husband was John Henry Horn. The next child, Clarence Holland Gwaltney. Bertie Obina Epps. The grandchildren that they have buried at the cemetery are Dorothy Epps, James Epps, Doris Epps, George Epps, Mary Louise Gwaltney, Ruth Sadler, The next one is a great-grandchild, Melvin Chestnut Gwaltney. This is the headstone for Louis Taylor. He was a brother of George Taylor. Louis married a widow lady, but they never had any children. Samuel Carmack was the brother of Grandma Gwaltney's mother, Olivia. Sam married Fanny Taylor, which was the sister of Louis and George Taylor. Sam died young, so Aunt Fanny took her children back to live with her mother. Grandmama's mother died when she was less than 2 years old, so Grandpapa Taylor took her back to live with his mother. So Aunt Fanny's children and Grandmama were double first cousins, but they were brought up together, so they felt more like brothers and sisters. Aunt Fanny's children were Henry and John Carmack. This is the stone for Henry's wife, Alice. We do not have a picture of Henry's headstone that's being developed at this time. Or Gwaltney-Thompson was an Indian lady that Mama got acquainted with in the 1920s when she moved to Wayne County. She became almost like part of the family as the years went by. She had a sister, Glennie. They died within 2 weeks of each other. I was guardian for Glennie, and Miss Dora had no one to take care of her, so I buried both of them out there in the family cemetery. Orthopedic clinic, start there. The shop back of the orthopedic clinic to your left is the site that Grandmama lived in when they first came to Wayne County in 1886. The road to Snow Hill went directly back of where you see these buildings. All this land has been in the Thompson family since the mid-1700s, and a land division record of James and Wiley Thompson that was dated in 1842, Bryant Thompson received this portion of the property. He gave to A.J. Gwaltney and Martha Gwaltney a section of this cemetery when their daughter Daisy died in 1892. To give you some idea of how large the cemetery was to start with, it was 75 feet beyond the cemetery going northeast and 120 feet on the left-hand side of the cemetery going northwest. All this section of the cemetery had been growing up for 100 years, and there's where all the large trees and the thorns and thistles were growing. There were 9 people buried outside the fence in the cemetery, and those remains have been moved to the inside of the fence. They're mostly on the back row and the merit stone to the left.